This video goes over how to find a bariatric surgeon. Now, before we get into the details, I'll give a little bit of a shameless plug. My practice is in southeastern Michigan in the Detroit suburbs, and I'm happy to see and care for anybody who has either had weight loss surgery already or is looking for weight loss surgery who lives in that area or is within driving distance of the area. Now, when you're looking for a bariatric surgeon, I've noticed that there really are two different types of surgeons who perform bariatric surgery. So the first is an obesity specialist, someone who really understands weight gain and nutrition and exercise, and essentially spends all of their working time focused on treating obesity, and usually surgery is their primary means by which they achieve these goals. This person is knowledgeable about hormonal changes, this idea of the set point and these hormonal shifts that I discuss in great detail in so many of these videos will be very at the top of their mind for them, and they will certainly acknowledge how this all works and be fluent in this set point conversation. Another thing that an obesity specialist who happens to also be a surgeon will do is they will work with patients who've already had weight loss surgery. Whether they need a revision surgery or they're just struggling with some issue or complication, they're happy to take on the toughest cases and will do a significant portion of what we call revisions or second-time surgeries, which are much more challenging and much more complicated, as a good portion of their practice. Really, this is ideally who you want to find to do your surgery. Now, it's not always possible because this does represent probably less than half of all the people out there who are performing the surgery, but this is something that you want to look for. Now, the other type of surgeon that's out there is really a general surgeon, someone who performs all kinds of other intestinal surgery and hernias and gallbladders, and most of us, including myself, will do these surgeries, but they account for a relatively small portion of our practice, where the general surgeon kind of looks at a bariatric case as just another case that they do and doesn't really spend as much time focusing on obesity and tends to kind of pass any nutrition issues or exercise issues or anything that doesn't have to do directly with the surgery onto the rest of the team. Now, you can get good results and that can work, especially when they're supported by a really great team. But I think that if you have the opportunity to find someone who truly is an obesity specialist and is fluent in hormonal changes, because that surgeon is almost always the leader of the team. And when you have that person leading the team, then all of these things will translate into the messages that the psychologist is giving you, that the nutritionist is giving you, and that the rest of the team is giving you. A general surgeon, they're typically going to push the low-carb diet and long-term use of protein shakes. They're going to talk a lot more about restriction and malabsorption rather than the hormonal changes as driving weight loss. And oftentimes they really won't take on revisions, and there's a large number of these surgeons who won't do gastric bypasses. They really only do sleeves, and they do that because the gastric bypass is a more difficult surgery. So we kind of have three levels in terms of the technical skills required to do these surgeries. The hardest surgeries are these revisions, where you're dealing with scar tissue and altered anatomy. Next is a gastric bypass, and then finally is a sleeve. Sleeve gastrectomies are not particularly challenging surgeries to do. And so a lot of times general surgeons will just kind of focus on the sleeve because they don't spend as much time on weight loss surgeries, so they just don't develop the expertise necessary to take on the more complicated cases. So if it's the only reasonable person either in your insurance plan or your geography, then it is okay to go with with someone who really fits more of this description. But if possible, you want to find an obesity specialist. When you're looking at experience, a lot of people say, oh, well, you know, how many cases have you done? What's your experience? And I think that is important. You don't want to find someone who's inexperienced. But after about 5 years or so in practice, and after around 100 or so cases per year, we really don't see a huge difference in terms of outcomes. And so a surgeon who's done 5,000 surgeries may not be better, in fact, may not be nearly as good as someone who's only done 1,000 surgeries. 1,000 lifelong surgeries is generally a pretty good amount, and at that point you've kind of worked out every kink that there is in these procedures, and are able to do this as well as anybody. Even 500 or so cases, you're generally pretty good after 500 cases. So you also want to look for someone who does a good procedure mix, especially if you're someone who doesn't quite know what surgery you're looking for. If you've kind of gone through all these videos, done your research, thought this out, and are dead set on, say, a sleeve gastrectomy, then going to a surgeon who really only offers a sleeve gastrectomy is reasonable, assuming you have done that research thoroughly. But I can't tell you the number of times I have a patient come to me who comes in saying, I want a sleeve gastrectomy, or I want a gastric bypass. As we work through things, we recognize that that's probably not a great option for them for a number of different reasons. And oftentimes we'll switch. So even though your initial research may show something, when you go to a surgeon who offers a mix, you get that expert and really unbiased level of advice. Because if we're able to do the gastric bypass or we're able to do the sleeve gastrectomy, it really doesn't matter to us which surgery you have. We just want you to be successful. Whereas if you're a surgeon who only does sleeve gastrectomies, you're not going to encourage that patient to perhaps consider a gastric bypass, even though it might be their best option, because then you know that patient is going to go to another surgeon, and quite frankly, you're going to lose the business. And there is that element of all of us kind of needing to do surgeries in order to earn money and survive. That is the inherent nature of how surgeons are paid, whether they're employed by a hospital or whether they're in private practice. There really isn't much difference there. We all must do a certain number of cases in order to make a certain amount of money, and about 90 to 95% of all contracts, if you do more surgery, you will get paid more money. So oftentimes the financial incentives for someone who's employed are actually greater than for someone who's in private practice, where we might think the opposite is true. So you really want to look for someone who does a mix of all three surgeries, a bypass, a sleeve, and a revision. And if you are looking for a duodenal switch, then that really is going to narrow down the number of surgeons who perform that. Probably only 1 out of every 20 bariatric surgeons will perform duodenal switch operations right now. That number is growing, but it really does limit who is going to be available to do these procedures. For us in Michigan, there's really only one surgeon who I would refer someone to who wanted to have a duodenal switch. And he's actually on the other side of the state from me. How many years in practice? You really want greater than 5. I think after 5 years, we tend to be pretty good. And there's some people who are certainly really good at year 3 or 4. Year 1 or 2, you might want to think twice about going to see someone who is 1 year out of their fellowship. There really is a learning curve with these procedures. And when I look at my own experience in my first years or 2 compared to what I'm able to do now in the operating room and the safety profile, my complication rate, there was a pretty big difference. And some of it was that I kind of, I started my practice right at the point where we were starting to perfect this. So everybody's complication rate was improving as we went from 2006 when I started my practice to now. But when I do look back, I recognize that there were certainly some things that I could have done better back then. And so I would encourage you to avoid a surgeon in their first or second year out from fellowship. And greater than 5, you should be totally safe. And the last thing is something most people wouldn't think about, which is that they participate in a data collaborative. And what a data collaborative is that all of their outcomes are tracked. So anytime someone comes back to the emergency room, anytime they have to reoperate on someone, anytime they have to transfuse blood after these surgeries, anytime anything that wasn't planned happens, it gets tracked. And when you're in a data collaborative, you'll get measured. And you'll say your complication rate is lower than average. Your complication rate is higher than average. And getting just these feedback reports and knowing where you are compared to your peers and looking at everything that goes wrong after surgery as a really negative thing that we have to work to prevent, it pushes us to get that much better. Surgeons are by nature competitive people, and when you track us and measure us, we get better like everybody else. And while you might want to think, well, every surgeon should want to do this. That's true, but there tends to be, in all of us, this rationalization, well, yeah, but that was a really difficult case, or that patient was really big, or that patient had difficult anatomy, or you tend to explain away your complications because having complications hurts. It really hurts the surgeon. Obviously, it hurts the patient as well, but to think that when a surgeon has complications, that they look at it like another day in the office, that's not how we view things. They are incredibly difficult things for us to go through. They weigh on us heavily emotionally. They preoccupy us at times when we're not working, when we're at our kids' sporting events, or in other social situations, in the back of our mind, we're still thinking about that patient that we're worried about or that may have had some things happen that we really wished hadn't happened. My wife always knows if I've had a complication because my personality changes and I appear more distant. And so we all really don't like to have complications. So it's natural sometimes to make excuses almost in an effort of self-preservation. And what these data collaboratives do is they don't allow you to make those excuses. They compare you head to head. They track things and measure things and show you where you are and where you need to improve. All of us can get better at something. And there's always something, no matter how long you've been doing this, you can do a little bit better. And when you participate in a data collaborative, it gives you the opportunity and the feedback to track that and to get better. So where do you find a surgeon? A friend or a family member is a great place because you know what someone else's experience has been with the office staff, with the surgeon, with the hospital that they work at, with all these other components. You know where they are and where they stand with this. And because of that, you generally can get a pretty good perspective on things. So if you have a family member who really says, oh, this doctor was fantastic, they spent time with me, they listened to me, they were trustworthy, my surgery went well, the hospital stay was pleasant, all of the things that I had wanted to happen after the surgery was what happened. That's a great thing. Just because they like them personally, I think that may not be enough. You want for the whole process, the whole thing to have gone well. Another place is the ASMBS, our governing body, our Society of Bariatric Surgeons. If you go to asmbs.org/patients, there's a way to find surgeons who are involved in the ASMBS, and that's a very reasonable way for you to find somebody, because these are essentially the group of those surgeons who are obesity specialists. We're people who really try to, and we go to the meetings, we stay current, we're involved with the insurance issues on the statewide level, and it's a marker for someone who really cares a lot about obesity surgery and is working to get better at it. Feel free to visit with more than one surgeon. That's totally reasonable to go. If you meet with someone and you don't get the right vibe, then look for someone else. There's nothing wrong with that. Some people may refer to it as doctor shopping, but I think when you're looking for a surgeon, it's not so much doctor shopping because you know you're going to have their procedure. It's looking for someone you feel comfortable with because, let's be honest, weight loss surgery is a personal journey. And if you have someone who you feel is a worthwhile guide on that journey, someone who has your back and has your best interest in mind, that goes a long way toward your success and toward your motivation and toward making a lot of these changes that are so important. So if you don't get that vibe from your first surgeon, look around. There's a lot of good surgeons out there. Also YouTube and Facebook, and that's another way for surgeons to start to reach out and communicate with their patients and to help educate the world about how amazing these surgeries can be for people. And some of the pitfalls as well and some of the dangers that occur. I think when you're looking at YouTube and Facebook profiles, be wary of the overly salesy pitch and instead look for someone who has expertise, because these surgeries have good things about them and there's bad things about them. And to say that there's no bad things at all and everything is always rosy is not telling the truth. And you want that surgeon who is honest about these things and who says, these are complications, they can happen, and when they do, I will work with you, I will help you, I will do everything I possibly can, because there is not a surgeon out there who has a 0% complication rate unless they've retired recently and are no longer performing surgery. So you want to look for a balanced perspective on things, because that is how your life will be after surgery. It will be balanced. There will be good things. There may be bad things. And you want someone who's going to help shift the good things up and minimize the bad things. So personality. Again, this is a journey. So looking for someone who you find motivating and who you think is going to help you make these changes and is on the same path as you, who, if someone's going to tell you, hey, protein shake, protein shake, protein shake, and eat as much protein as you can, and you've looked at my nutritional program and feel like it fits better with your long-term goals, recognizing that there's going to be this conflict is important before surgery so that you're not kind of dealing with it after surgery. And that really has to do with your conversations with a nutritionist and with a lot of other people who are going to be involved in helping you make these changes. And if you feel like you can't trust or don't want to go down the pathway, that your surgeon and his or her team is pushing you, that's something that you want to figure out up front rather than, kind of abandoning them at 6 months and saying, oh, I'm just going to follow Dr. Weiner's videos or something along those lines. You want to ideally align yourself with someone who has the same perspective and the same thought process about how best to do this as you do. You also want someone who you think has your best interest in mind, who really is watching out for you, is getting to know some of the things and aspects of your life that may interfere with your success after surgery. And if there's times of trouble, are they going to be there for you, or are they going to pass you off to the nutritionist? Again, these are sometimes not easy things to figure out, but your gut instinct oftentimes will give you some good guidance there. Geography is important, but I think you should be willing to travel a little bit to find the right surgeon. And it varies. In a state like Montana, you're almost definitely going to have to travel a long way. In more urban centers, you shouldn't have to travel very far. If it means going across town 30 or 40 minutes, I think that's a reasonable thing to do, assuming you find someone that you really can believe in. I have people drive from all over the place to come see me. I try to keep it relatively close to Detroit because you don't want someone too far away, because then you can have some issues in terms of it being a big struggle for them to come and see you if there's any issues. But the hospital stay is short. It's a day long. And so if you're traveling 45 minutes to the hospital, while that may seem like a big deal, especially if you have friends and family who might want to visit you, recognize that it's such a short period of time. I mean, you're most often you're checking out the day after. So you're not going to have time for a lot of visitors, and you're really not going to need a lot of visitors. So looking at that is I think, an important thing, and it is worth driving and traveling. If you do travel a long way, you really must have a contingency plan for complications, meaning if at a week out you have some problem, and again, we don't see it often, but 1 or 2% of the time we're going to see a situation where you need some urgent treatment in the first few weeks after surgery. You have to have a contingency plan and know where you're going to go and how your surgeon would be involved in your care at that process, because a lot of times you want for your bariatric surgeon to care for you. And if it even means you get admitted, you get stabilized, and then sent by ambulance to another hospital, that's not an unreasonable contingency plan if your geography really limits you to the right surgeon. Thankfully, that doesn't happen very often and can generally be worked out. Your insurance company may tell you who you can and can't see. There are some plans which limit their members to have access to only 1 or 2 surgeons in town. So that's an important thing to figure out. You may want to go with a certain surgeon, but you're not able to because the insurance coverage doesn't allow for it. And oftentimes also there's what we call stage deductibles, which means if you go see these surgeons, your deductible is $1,000. But if you go to these other group of surgeons, it may be $2,000 or $3,000. Essentially, it would cost you additional money to go to a different group of surgeons. And we're seeing that more and more. So all important things to consider. Also the team. It really does take a team to care for bariatric patients, and there's a big difference between hospital and private practice physicians, and I think there's pros and cons to both. The hospital programs tend to have a much larger team, more nutritionists, psychologists, and kind of more resources available for you. What happens though often in these is that the surgeon gets kind of relegated to just the surgery, and you don't get that leader of the team with the big picture view of how to provide the comprehensive care of the patient. And some hospital programs are missing that. Other hospital programs will absolutely have that and have kind of evolved and put that in place. And it's going to vary for sure, but that tends to be the more system approach where you get a more conventional kind of standard and dogma, and you're going to see more protein shakes, you're going to see more carb restriction meal plans in those types of programs. But that is starting to change. So don't necessarily think if it's a hospital-based program, it's always going to be kind of in the old school nutritional approach and not embrace the fruits and vegetables. I'm seeing there are some hospital programs in our area who are really moving toward a plant predominant or plant-based diet like the Pound of Cure program as an ideal post-operative diet. When you're looking at private practice, it really is the surgeon, because he or she owns the business and essentially employs the staff, the nutritionist, and the psychologist and all those people kind of work with him or her, that you do tend to get that leadership mentality and that underlying guiding philosophy that kind of pervades through all of the care on the team members. So but you typically in those situations have a much smaller team just because the financial structure is different. A private practice office doesn't have nearly the same financial resources that a hospital does. So it's a smaller, more tight-knit team. Some people like that. Some people like kind of being part of the system. That really is a choice for you, and I think either one is a very reasonable option. And then finally, how much are you going to need a nutritionist and a psychologist and an insurance expert? This is going to vary from person to person. Some people come in with a really good diet and a very clear idea of how they're going to eat afterward. They're not going to need a ton of help from a nutritionist. Other people really feel challenged by this and look at this as some place that they need a lot of advice, a lot of help, a lot of hand-holding, and you're going to need that nutritionist. So kind of recognizing what your needs are going to be before surgery and what the program offers is important so that when you do get to the point where you need some help, you don't feel let down when it's not there. We're always tempted to make a big deal, especially when it comes to surgeons. Oh, you got to find this guy. He's got the best outcomes. He's the only one that we should trust. He's 10 times better than everyone else. But now that we have these data collaborators, we really know. We know who's good and who's not. And what you find is that you look at the best performers and then you look at the average performers. And typically when we're looking at the serious complication rate, the difference is less than 1%. And what we find in Michigan, where we kind of get ranked every year, is you have 1 year and you're at the top, and the next year you're average, and then the next year after that you're at the top again, because it's really one complication. One issue can take you from being one of the top performers to being a middle performer, just because of the number of cases we do and how over time we've all really gotten pretty good at these procedures. That there's not a huge difference in outcomes from a good surgeon to a great surgeon. Now you're going through a revisional procedure, something more complicated, and with gastric bypass too, there's going to be a bigger difference from surgeon to surgeon because it's a more difficult surgery. But when so based on the complexity of your procedure, and this may be more important, but if you're kind of a routine average patient having a sleeve, there's really not a lot of difference in terms of your surgical outcomes from one surgeon to the next. And also when I kind of look and I think about my colleagues in bariatric surgery, about 9 out of 10 of us are really good surgeons who I would trust a family member with. Now, how do you know who that 1 out of 10 is? It can be hard to figure that out, but a lot of times your gut will tell you. So the bottom line is you want to pick a surgeon that you feel comfortable with and look really at the entire program and try to predict what your needs are going to be afterward and make sure that the philosophy and the resources that are available are going to align with the direction you want to go and what your vision is for your future relationship with your surgeon. And your gut instinct is often very reliable in figuring this out.